Hey, David, how's it going?
Hey, good. Thanks. How you doing, man?
Good, except that it is far too late at night to be this amped up after a good conversation. It's 10:15 at night here in Cleveland, Ohio, but we had such a good chat with Chris. I'm fired up, man.
Yeah, I feel like we do this too often where we get into some topic that gets me really excited to take some kind of next step. And I feel like
Hmm.
those kind of mindset moments are really powerful. You're right, maybe not the greatest thing for 10:15 at night for you and I, but that mindset, I think that all too often there are pharmacists that at the end of a 40, 50-hour week, it's just exhaustion hits in, that the hurdles that exist to starting some kind of side hustle or investing, and the fear and the risk and the imposter syndrome and all that stacks up, and it can be really hard to get going into doing something else. But I love how our guest talked so much today about the mindset of doing that and what that can bring for you.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we wanted to bring Chris Caldwell on the show. Chris is a former teacher, now a sales pro, a sales coach, a sales trainer. Just he knows how to talk to real estate investors, entrepreneurs, uh, people that are involved in a lot of interpersonal communication, right? And how to teach them to be better at that, and how to get the right mindset around doing it. And I just every time I talk to him, I get fired up. Like I said, it's just he's an easy guy to listen to. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think his jump from being a teacher to jumping into the entrepreneurial space is hopefully pretty relatable.
Hmm.
I know that there's not a lot of pharmacists that are looking to make that entire jump and take the amount of risk that he did. But even just to do something on the side that feels in a very, very different gear from what your training and college brought you to, that can just be really intimidating. And so to hear his story about how he got through that, and the mental exercise and all the hurdles there, I think can hopefully be encouraging for folks that are looking to just start some kind of side hustle or investing journey.
Yeah, I agree. Well, again, hopefully you guys enjoy the episode as much as we enjoyed talking to Chris, and hopefully it's as inspiring as we are inspired now. So, with that, we'll take you guys right to it. Hey, Chris, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate you guys inviting me on.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. You've been we've interacted plenty of times in the past. I'm always inspired when
Hmm.
we get a chance to chat. So I wanted to make sure to bring you on, talk to the audience, and just share that same awesome mindset that you've shared with us over the years with everybody. So with that, maybe we can just jump right in. Give us a little bit about your career, like an intro on who you are, what you do.
Yeah, so I have a I have a bit of an unorthodox career, but I guess a lot of people could say that. So I actually studied history and education in college, and I went into teaching, and I spent 10 years teaching history and government at a all boys school in Cincinnati, where I went to college, and then all boys school in Baltimore. And I left that career about 6 years ago, and I went into sales and sales management. I went directly from teaching students history and government, young men history and government, to teaching professionals how to sell. Obviously, there's a big learning curve with me on the sales side, but at least I had the teaching and the pedagogical background that made the transition a bit easier for me. And I went from doing that, and then I went to work for an insurance brokerage in the Baltimore area and ran and grew a sales team for a few years there. And then I went off and started my own business about 2 years ago, focusing on coaching and training, specifically with sales professionals, entrepreneurs, and small and medium sized business.
So I love that story. There's a few things in there that I feel like probably just gave a bunch of pharmacists like I need to take a deep breath, because you went from a very sturdy, stable career as an
Yeah.
educator to then let's jump out of that and let's go into a whole different field, which is one thing, and then into this entrepreneurship thing, which is a whole nother thing. And so I
Yeah.
feel this like ball of stress forming in pharmacist stomach right now. So
Yeah.
can you tell me more about that switch to entrepreneurship and that mindset and all that went into that big jump that you had?
Oh man, that's such a great question, and you really hit the nail on the head with like the anxiety. right? Because I'm not a sociopath. Like I felt that anxiety, right? Like I was scared. And I still remember my last day teaching, in which when they announced to the school that I was leaving, because most people didn't know at the end of the year faculty meeting, I had 3 or 4 faculty members come up to me and very much were projecting that anxiety onto me. Right? Like, what are you going to do? Do you have it? And keep in mind, I did not have a job. I had no idea what I was going to do. I had no plan. And I just said, I don't know what I'm going to do. But, I have a handful of friends that I would grab beers with every now and then and listen to their stories of business and find out how much money they were making. And I was like, gosh, like, I mean, if they could do it, and one thing that did actually give me peace of mind, as backwards as this may sound, is I remember telling one colleague, if I realize I leave and go into the world and suck at everything except teaching history and government, I can immediately go back and find a job teaching history and government. Like there are not, male teachers who are effective are not very much in supply. So I always had that in my back pocket. Like if I leave teaching and if in 10 months it's just not doing it for me, I can always go back. And then I went into a field in which I had a huge amount of imposter syndrome. I was making cold calls as a sales trainer who had never sold anything. And so it was, now, of course, I didn't get up in front of the room and do any training for a while after getting that job, but just walking around, going to events, calling people on the phone and presenting myself as such, very much felt out of alignment and felt fake. And that phrase of fake it till you make it has never really resonated with me. So there's a huge amount of anxiety there. And then going to running the sales team. I had never been a sales manager before, and I'd only sold for a short period of time. And then starting on my own career, they've all come with huge amounts of pressures and anxieties. But I've just been able to work through them, sometimes more quickly than other times, and recognize that in order to pursue the personal growth I'm looking for in my life, and whatever that final evolution of Chris is, it's not going to be done without doing hard things and without doing scary things. And so, I guess if they're feeling anxious listening to it, I understand, because I went through those feelings for sure.
I love that though, because it's a real life example of somebody going through what I know some of our audience is going through right now, right? And it may not be this huge jump from pharmacy to something else. It could just be from retail to hospital, or night shift to, day shift, or part-time to full-time, or vice versa, right? Like all of those things can feel scary. And so hearing it from somebody else who's been through it, like I think there's always value in that. So I appreciate you sharing that. That's awesome.
Sure. Yeah, of course. And one thing, I actually just started working with an executive coaching client a few weeks ago, and he's considering making a big move. And he's had a lot of success in the career he's in. It's not like as dramatic a switch, right? But it is a pretty big role shift for him. And one thing I told him, I said, let's call him Mike. I said, Mike, all of the qualities you have that make you really good at this job are the exact qualities that are going to make you really good at whatever other job you take, right? Your desire to learn, your discipline, your commitment to being the best you can be, your healthy fear that you have that maybe I'm not good enough, I need to learn more, I need to work harder, I need to be better, the desire to provide for your family. Those things are fully translatable skills. And when I tell you that the marketplace does not have them in abundance, trust me, the marketplace does not have people with these skills in abundance. So I know a lot of your audience has that, right? They have that natural curiosity. They're well educated. They're disciplined. They're hard workers. They're naturally curious, right? They wouldn't be listening to a podcast like this if they weren't. I would encourage them to trust that all of those qualities, which have gotten them where they are, which is significantly further along professionally than an enormous majority of people throughout the world, those same qualities can be translated into pretty much any other field they want to pursue.
I love that. Really glad you brought that up. I think that's a super important point. And again, if you missed that, go back, re-listen to it because Chris is a great way of saying it. It's important to understand that like it's not just all doom and gloom if the exact thing you thought was the right path for you doesn't exactly follow that same that same road. So really
Yeah.
good point, Chris.
And look, I came from a really traditional family. When I was teaching, I was a teacher. My brother's a surgeon, and my little brother was a Marine. My dad was a lawyer. My mom was a nurse. I mean, it's just like you look up all American family. It's like a lawyer and a nurse with a doctor, a teacher, and a Marine. And so I very much was raised in that. Go get your 4-year degree. Go get a job doing whatever you studied, and that's your job. That's your career, whatever upward trajectory there is within that field, great, pursue it, but this is what you're doing. So I very much had to fight all those that same programming, that same conditioning in order to, explore out beyond that.
I love it. So I want to talk for a second before we get too deep into the real estate stuff specifically. You obviously are in the sales space, right? Training other people how to sell, training
Yep.
entrepreneurs how to sell themselves, right? How is
hmm
this relevant, right? Like this is almost an unfair question to ask. Like, why did I bring you on the show, right? Like, if you're a pharmacist listening to this, doing 500 scripts a day, no lunch most days, maybe you've got a patient you need to counsel on medication, like you probably don't think of yourself as selling ever. What would you say to
Yeah.
somebody think like in that spot?
Yeah, so good question because it's far more translatable than it might seem on the surface. So,
Mhm.
as you mentioned, my business is Sell As You Are, and we do primarily work with salespeople, entrepreneurs, and small businesses to help them sell, to help them learn to communicate. But what we really focus on is it's very much an approach to holistic sales training in which we focus on the mindset of the individual. The reality is in life is the common fear that all humans have, many psychologists would argue, and Alfred Adler became very renowned for this theory, is that our biggest fear is interpersonal conflict.
Mm.
Like, that's it. It goes to the old joke Jerry Seinfeld said the number one fear people have, the number two fear is dying. The number one fear is public speaking. Therefore, what was the joke? Therefore, people would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy, right? and that's because it is inherent in public speaking, in interactions with difficult patients or customers, interactions with your coworkers. It's all interpersonal conflict, all of it. And so much of our basic needs in life are derived from how well we get along with other people, how well we fit into the different roles that we play. That this type of fear can be crippling and anxiety provoking in every single circumstance. And sales very much is it's a job, it's a career that just throws you into the arena. And very many of your listeners, many pharmacists deal with the same thing, right? Constantly dealing with people all day, every day. And so I would say that, anytime you're talking sales or you're talking entrepreneurship, the shift people have to make is around that mindset of recognizing that you need to have concerns for other people's concerns, right? It's okay to care what other people think, but the moment you become afraid of what other people think, you start showing up in a watered down version of yourself, and you're not able to be as authentic. And when you can't do that, you can't connect with people because that's what people are really looking for. Um, so yeah, that would be my take on it.
I love it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that's translatable there to other areas of life, like you're saying, like that
Yep.
works in pharmacy, that works in a lot of other areas, and I think that those skills are very important to work through. You also brought up imposter syndrome, and I want to hang there for a minute because
Sure.
imposter syndrome I think is really powerful in general. One, I'd love for you to define that briefly, but then two, we have pharmacists listening that went to 5, 6, 7, 8 years of school to be a pharmacist. And I think that there's this inherent belief that like, well, I have to do that much training in order to shift gears and to do something else and to be
hmm
even halfway competent in something else. So how would you help someone through that kind of imposter syndrome hurdle?
Well, I think that number one, so imposter syndrome for me is when basically when people doubt their skills and talents within a certain role, right? It gets the name from they feel like an imposter. I'm putting on this show of being this expert or this professional in this area. But the question that keeps going through their head is if they only knew, if they only knew, if they only knew how much I doubt myself, if they only knew what I didn't know, if they only knew how anxious I am when, I pretend to be confident, but it's really a superiority complex covering up for my anxiety and my insecurities, right? And we feel that in all different areas of our life. But what you said, David, is so on point about when you're transitioning from a role in pharmacy, in which, like you mentioned, there are very clear guidelines you have to go through, very clear gates that you have to go through in order to qualify for a role like that. It is difficult to shift your mindset out of that into the reality that most of the world doesn't operate in that way. Right? Where I operated, you had to have a degree in education, you had to have a degree in your subject matter, and you had to have this amount of experience to get the job. And you go to the professor level, it's even more strict. And in medicine is certainly like that. But in business and in entrepreneurship, it is becoming less and less like that. Actually, businesses are caring less about people taking breaks from their career. Businesses are caring less about people working at 4 different jobs in 6 years. They're caring less about college education. What they're looking for is they're looking for the person. They're looking for the individual, right? And much credit to my first boss outside of teaching, who saw that in me. My resume said all I could do was teach history and lead retreats. That was all I had ever done. But he saw something in me and recognized that this, whatever I had, was translatable to this field. And so I would really encourage your listeners to sit down and say, okay, let's set the professional qualifications aside. As an individual, how do I show up and contribute? What are my soft skills? What are the things that you can't put on a resume? What am I good at? What am I really good at? What makes me good at this job? Right? Because the moment you graduate from pharmacy school, it's everything else about you that makes you good at being a pharmacist. Right? And those are the types of things I would want them to bring to light and to really focus on and recognize that these are gifts and skills that are absolutely translatable.
I think that reminds me too of one of the challenges I see with new investors, especially, right? New entrepreneurs, but new investors, especially, where just like you mentioned, there are no set gates you have to go through. There's also no set schedule, right? You're used to either having a shift assigned to you or a day of the week that you work at the pharmacy, or whatever that might look like. There's all these blocks and sort of just calendar events in front of you. Whereas an investor, as an entrepreneur, none of that's there. So like, how do you work with somebody, especially if they're still in a W-2 and thinking about entrepreneurship, thinking about real estate investing? Like, what does that shift look like in terms of getting them over that feeling of, well, no one's here to tell you what to do. There's no boss. You got to handle it yourself.
Yeah. And that is actually, that realization is what really shifted for me. And I'll get to your question in just a moment, but I coached a golf team when I was teaching, and the boys would tee off at 3:00 and all their dads would be there. And I was like, wait, hold on, I thought you worked 9 to 5. Like, I thought, like, what is this freedom? Like, people can just leave work. And of course, since COVID, it's become even more flexible. But what they did is they opened my eyes to what was possible. Right. And of course, most of them were CEOs, EVPs, entrepreneurs. And but it totally opened my eyes to, oh, wow, like you can create a life, be very successful financially, and be able to take off work at 2:30 to watch your kid play golf. Like, I didn't know that was possible. And what I would do, what I would recommend for people who are on that W-2, that so-called 9 to 5, or just a more set schedule, is to manage yourself in that same way, right? If that's how you're used to being managed, these are the times I show up. These are the things I have to do. These are the behaviors I have to execute for the reward, the income that I've received. Think about during your free time, how can you schedule things in a similar way to allow yourself to fall into the same routines and the same patterns that you've become accustomed to and you've become used to. And then how can you find someone to help hold you accountable to that? Because that is, accountability is a huge part of, set schedules and your typical 9 to 5. It's you have coworkers, you have a boss, you have things you have to do. So when you move into entrepreneurship, one of the huge challenges that more traditional employees or workers have is that you immediately lose that accountability. Because you're only accountable to yourself, as you guys probably know, right? You're only accountable to yourself or maybe to your spouse or your children, right? But your kids don't know what's going on. So like maybe it's your spouse and they don't want to nag you or beat you up. So, they typically let you do what it is you need to do or want to do. And so that is so extremely difficult to hold yourself accountable to that. So if you can find someone within your network to hold you accountable to the plan you've laid out for yourself, it makes the transition much easier.
I really like the focus on accountability there. And I like putting that to goals and not just the clock, because I think there's this big temptation that if I put in X number of hours doing something, no matter what it is that I do, that I will be successful. Like I keep hearing the running story of the person who spends 8 hours tweaking their business card to be just right. So they have a really cool looking business card. Yep. And that probably didn't need to be an 8-hour task. Yes. Right. So are there things that, that you recommend to someone that's starting out that may be tempted to do the things that are fun and not necessarily the things that are really going to drive their entrepreneurship or drive their investing forward?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this is what I work with a lot of my entrepreneurs and sales professionals on, right? Because look, the reality is being a sales professional in most businesses is like being an intrapreneur. You are like a mini entrepreneur in the business. Mm-hmm. You have your quota. You have the things you have to do. Sometimes in recurring revenue businesses, you have your book of business, right? And so what I often work with my clients on is define what the outcome you want is, right? So say it is to find 20 real estate agents who will partner with you on maybe wholesale investments or something of the sort, right? And that's the target. I want 20 people to agree to bring me opportunities, right? And I'm not sure if that's the best target for you or your audience, but right, mm-hmm. that's what we're looking for. Okay, now ask yourself, and this is where the rubber meets the road. What are the behaviors you have to do in order to get to those 20? And this is usually like the giant slice of humble pie that my clients often eat because they say, well, I have to make calls. Okay, so how many calls do you think you have to make in order to bring on one investor? Well, I don't know, probably 150 calls. Just throwing out random numbers. Okay, 150 calls. What else could you do? Well, I could email. Okay, how many emails do you think you have to do? And then they say the answer. Okay, what else can you do? Well, I can reach out on LinkedIn. Okay, how many connection requests do you think you'd have to send? I can drop in and knock on doors physically at different real estate locations. Okay, how many of those people do you think you'd have to talk to? And to be honest with yourself on these are the behaviors I think will get there. And right, this is these are all swags, right? Scientific wild ass guesses, right? Mm-hmm. Especially when you're first coming because you don't have any data to look back from. But to be able to build out a plan where it's like, I feel confident that if I do X amount of calls, X amount of emails, X amount of LinkedIn requests, X amount of, door knocks or door swings, as they call it in the old days in sales, and maybe attend X amount of local networking events, that will net me each of the behavior number one. If I do this many of them will net me 8 new connections. Behavior number 2, if I do this many will net me 4 new connections, right? And to build that out and recognize, okay, over the next 3 months, this can get me to my 20 referral partners. Now, how much time do I have? What hours can I commit? And then work that math backwards on building out a behavioral plan to begin to work toward it. And what happens is once you begin to do that, number one, like I said, it's usually humbling and overwhelming when you start adding all the numbers up. Mm-hmm. You realize that like, oh, wow, okay, this isn't going to be all that easy, is it? It's going to take some real blood, sweat, and tears. But number two, once you begin to show up and execute on those behaviors, two things will happen. Number one, you'll be able to look at, were my swags even close? I mean, you may realize it takes 2 to 3 times as much effort for the result that you thought, or it may take half as much. And so you can adjust the plan after a couple weeks. And number two, what you have done is you have put a plan together and you have kept the promises to yourself and showed up and worked the plan. And even if you haven't gotten the results you're quite looking for yet, just the fact that you're showing up and working the plan will help create momentum. It will help build confidence, and you'll learn lessons really quickly by showing up and doing it. Like you said, David, the person who works on their business card for 8 hours learns nothing about running a business. The person who spends 8 minutes on a business card and spends 8 hours knocking on doors and asking people and trying to sell something and getting rejected, they learn a ton. And so what plan can you build where you have to be in the arena, where you have to show up? And then how can you hold yourself or find someone else to help you hold yourself accountable?
I love that. And I know we talk often about starting with a why that can give that motivation to go out there and do those hard things like the door knocking, the cold calling, the LinkedIn, the whatever it needs to be to get those, for the running example, the 20 incoming deals. I think one other hurdle that pharmacists run into once those deals come is they have this, oh, holy crap moment of now I need to act on this. And here comes risk. Right?
Yes.
Like if I have a W-2 job, there's not inherently as much risk where I'm putting a lot of my own self on the line. But with a real estate investment in particular, this may be the largest or second largest purchase this individual has ever made. And so to make that jump and to take that risk can feel really scary as this all starts to come together. How do you help, especially a risk-averse pharmacist, deal with some of that risk that comes with entrepreneurship and investing?
So I think that risk is a really funny topic. And it is because, look, in the end, it's not real. It is just totally an illusion in our mind. And it is a word that refers to the pattern of thinking around a potential decision. Now, that being said, I'm not going to come in here and pretend like, oh, risk doesn't exist. You shouldn't think about that. Anybody who's feeling risk, like they just need to check themselves, right? Because certainly I have to take those things into account in my life, and it feels really real. If it feels really real, then it is in my reality. What I would often say, though, is I try to take the attention with my clients away from risk, right? Let's take it away from risk. And let's think about it this way. You make decisions all day, every day, right? You very rarely view them as risky. And that is because our risk on a scale of 1 to 10, wherever we rate the amount of risk is almost opposite to the scale of 1 to 10 rating we give in the confidence we have in ourselves to deal with whatever outcome comes. So if on a scale of 1 to 10, you feel at a 2 in your level of confidence that if this thing goes sideways, I'll be okay, then you're going to view that at a 9 out of 10 for risk, right? And if you view it a 10 out of 10, no matter what happens here, I'll be okay, then you'll view it at a 1 out of 10 for risk. And so taking the attention away from the risk, because once again, that's something we can't control. Now we're focusing on external factors, right? We're relying on other people. We're relying on inspections. We're relying on the process. A lot of these things are things we can't control. And bring it back to yourself. Bring it back to what you can control. You can control how you handle whatever the outcome is. And remind yourself of that. Think about what are all the times that something was risky, quote unquote, in your life, and it didn't work out. And look where you are now. How did you handle that? Looking back on it, there are probably a handful that you can say, gosh, at the time I was really upset that happened, but man, I'm glad that happened to me because I learned so much from that experience in my life. And recognize that the more you do things like this, the less risky they become. Not because on paper they become less risky, but the scale begins to shift. Your confidence in your ability to handle whatever outcome ends up happening goes higher and higher and higher. And therefore, the risk goes lower because it's purely a trick of perspective. And that's it. Now, they may be dealing with spouses that view things very differently than them, or business partners that view things very differently than them. And so they want to do the same thing with that spouse or that business partner and take it away from viewing it as risk and recognize if you're viewing it as an 8 out of 10 for risk, then that means you're probably viewing yourself, your own ability to handle the outcome, a 2 out of 10. Focus your attention there. Ask yourself why you're feeling that way and why you're probably being way too hard on yourself based on your past experience, professionally and personally.
I really like that. I feel like I talk to so many people who are outside of the real estate investing space, for example, and their assumption is either you are wildly successful or you're homeless when it doesn't work out, right? There's no in between, and there's no plan or no confidence that there's ever going to be a middle ground, right? It's like either this deal works out or I lose my pharmacy job and I don't have a house, and like it just goes so sideways so fast. And you're right, like that's not the reality that we're actually in, but it is in your mind, and it can be overwhelming.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And look, that's what we do. That's what our egos do. Our egos protect us, right? It is, Carl Jung talked about how the first half of your life is to build up your ego, and the second half is to let it go. And sometimes people come to that second half of life at the age of 15. Sometimes they never come to that second half of life. Sometimes they come to it at 40 in the midlife crisis when they're buying their Porsche. And, the reality is, our ego, the voice in your head, will take things to the extreme in order to talk you out of taking any type of right action toward progress. It will take you to the extreme to scare you into continuing to do what you're doing now. Because egos only operate in the moment now. And up to this point, you're still alive, right? It's done its job. You've survived life up to this point. So why the heck would you want to go messing with this formula that's put a house over your head, a car in your driveway, a paycheck deposited into your checking account every other week, and food on the table?
Yeah.
Like, why would you ever, like, the ego just wants to help you survive. And so it just can't make sense of why you will possibly think of making this move. And so what it's going to do is no one knows you better than you. And no one knows how to talk you out of doing things better than you do, because you know all your weaknesses and you know all your insecurities. Your subconscious is going to leverage that and then scare you as much as it can because it loves you and wants to protect you. Like, honestly, it loves you and wants to protect you, because we have a hard time in our mammalian brain to tell the difference between someone not liking us and a saber-toothed tiger about to kill us. The stress response is the same, right? Because the human brain has not caught up to our standard of living. We, for the most part, are rarely ever actually threatened physically with our life. I mean, rarely ever. And so what we do is we perceive all these other threats to be of similar nature. Our stress response responds the exact same way. And so that's what it will take you to in order to keep you right where you are.
I heard like that. And something you said just reminded me of, Kristen, all the time that we've worked together, one of the things I admire most is your ability to reflect on past experiences and then be gracious about them. I just, bar none, right? What role do you feel like gratitude plays in having that positive mindset? Like, is that your secret behind all this? Because I think it always comes out when I talk to you.
Well, one, I appreciate that. That's kind of you to say. Maybe you catch me at good times. I think, I think gratitude plays a huge role in all of this. And it's very like catchy to say, have an attitude of gratitude or, whatever the sayings are. But the reality is, and I think the deeper understanding that I've come to learn in my own journey regarding gratitude is that what gratitude does is gratitude shortens the separation that we feel in life, right? This idea that there is better than here. This idea that they are not good enough for us. I get so frustrated because my spouse does this. I get so frustrated because my coworker does that. And what we do is this 90% of each individual that we love and we have something in common with and that we get along with, we look at that 2% that we don't, right? We look at where they aren't. We look at the situation, the house that's not big enough, the car that's not comfy enough, the city that's not safe enough, whatever it is. And we focus on that. And then we ignore all the things in our lives that are amazing. The people we should appreciate, the people that we love, and the opportunities that we have. And so when you're able to be grateful and you're able to take intentional time to be here now, to recognize what you have and how fortunate you are to be where you are, what you do is you're counteracting that natural tendency to create separation. And that separation is a feeling of lack, a feeling of something's missing, a feeling that I'm not good enough, my life isn't good enough. And we're so programmed to go that way that what the gratitude, having gratitude, expressing appreciation and gratitude to other people, and using kindness towards them and ourselves it's shortening that gap. For that time in your life, whether it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe a whole day, you're not feeling that feeling anymore. And you're feeling so much more whole. And when you feel whole and you feel abundant, you don't need things from other people to help you feel that way. And you can show up in your most authentic self. When I'm feeling most grateful for my life is when I have the most courage to ask hard questions, right? Or to call someone out or to challenge someone, because I don't need their approval to feel like a 10. Like I feel like a 10, my life is going great. I don't need this person to like me in order for my life to continue to go great. So you know what? Screw it. I'm going to ask him this question that I need the answer to, but I'm always a little afraid to ask.
I love it.
So whenever we're reaching to bring that piece of us that we feel is missing toward us, we're always looking for other people to fill up that cup. Mm-hmm. But when we're able to do it on our own, we don't look to other people as much. Therefore, we can care about what others think, but we're not afraid of what others think.
I think that's super important, especially if you're just starting out in real estate investing. I talk to people who are like, well, yeah, I've got 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 houses, but I'm not anything like so-and-so. Or have you seen this guy who's 40 units in front of me? Like, it's so easy to get lost in what you haven't done instead of focusing on what you have done. Even if you've got nothing to your name, right? No investments at all, but you've got a great stable job. You've got an awesome family life. Like, there are so many great things that you do have, and it's easy to miss those things and focus on the next thing, rather than just settling in and enjoying what you have for a hot second. So I think it's important to talk about. Again, I always get that from you. So I wanted to make sure we hit on that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And so much of making changes in this area of your life is truly just listening to yourself. Like if you go through a day focusing on the stuff that makes you frustrated, upset, anxious, like be honest and check in with yourself. Like, how'd today go? As what was Dr. Phil's line? Oh, you're doing that? And how's that working out for you? Right? And just recognizing that, like, wow, I did not enjoy today. Why did I not enjoy today? Oh, because I thought about how my coworker was a backstabbing a-hole all day. Oh, okay. Well, maybe I should not do that. There are so many things in our life that cause pain and suffering. The thing that makes life so hard for so many people is the stupid things we do that make those natural events and circumstances way worse. So if you can just stop doing those stupid things that make it way worse, you realize that life immediately starts to become better.
Great stuff. Well, Chris, I want to go to our final infusion questions then. 3 questions we ask every guest on the show. We'll put our entrepreneur shift on the subset questions here. But First one is, what's one tangible strategy that you use to make sure that you're working on the business rather than getting stuck in your business?
This was a really difficult one for me, and has been. I'm very much a working in. I'm a practitioner, right? I'm the coach, I'm the trainer, I'm the consultant, but I need to be selling. I need to be growing the business. For me, it's blocking time on the calendar. Blocking time on the calendar to work on the business. Every Monday morning, I get with my teammate, Kate, and we map out my week. And we look at the things I need to do in the business and the things I need to do on the business.
Love it.
Right? Clouds and dirt. Like, what are the things we need to have our feet in the dirt grinding away on? And what are the things, big picture, we need to be working on that are important, but maybe not urgent? And we make sure, we say to each other, by the end of the week, where do I want to be in the business and where do I want to be on the business? And then we come to terms with that. Okay, now let's look at the times I have available in my calendar and let's schedule that time in. My teams mean for 3 hours on a growth plan on Friday for 2023, because we're about at the end of the 2 months, we need to check in with it. And that is working on the business. I need to be ready for that meeting to present the plan. So I had to work that after I get off this podcast. I'm going to be here in the office for a couple hours working on that plan. So being very intentional about recognizing clouds and dirt, and how do you allocate time towards both those things.
I love it. There's so much here that you're sharing that I'm guessing didn't come out real thoroughly in your training as a history teacher.
No, not really.
What's one resource that's been most helpful to you in your entrepreneurship journey, whether that's a book, a podcast, person, author, website, whatever that would be?
Gosh, I mean, look, it sounds so bad for me to say this, but I thought about this question a lot, and I was like, how can I answer this question in which I'm not being self-referential? And that is, and honest to God, sales training. Like, it is sales training or sales coaching. Because when you get into a room with other entrepreneurs or other salespeople, or you are coached how to sell or how to talk to people or how to prospect, or the art of negotiation, or it changed my life. I went from teaching right into business, and that business just so happened to be sales training. And I thank God every day, because that accelerated my career more quickly than anything ever could have. So when it comes to just business and entrepreneurship, it is learn how to sell. Seek out whether it's my company or one of the many other companies out there that do sales training and sales coaching really well. Seek out a resource so you can learn to think like an entrepreneur and learn to sell. When it comes to books, right, on the spiritual side of things, The Untethered Soul totally changed my life. And we haven't talked about it a lot here, but I'm a very spiritual guy, and that stuff's really important to me. That totally transformed my life, and that started me on my own path of self-discovery. When it comes to business, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. All the Robert Kiyosaki books, man, I was binging those things on Audible like they were a drug. Because it was just, my mindset was shifting so much listening to this. And I remember when he did the 4 quadrants, I can't even remember, of like whatever it was, where it's like, business owner is the quadrant you want to be in.
Right.
I told my wife that night after I read that book that I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to own my own business one day. And so just heads up, I'm going to do that. She was like, great, do it whenever you want. So that's what I recommend for resources.
I feel like I have those conversations with my wife all the time. Honey, I talked to this awesome person on this podcast. I'm going to go do this thing. Just trust me, it'll be fine. She's like, yeah, okay, well, whatever.
Yep.
All right. Well, then our last question, what's one piece of advice you'd give to a pharmacist that's contemplating a start in either real estate investing or really anything entrepreneurial?
I think that oftentimes I work with my clients on the why, right? David, you mentioned it earlier. What's your why? And I think it's very important to separate the two different types of whys. You have your egoic why, right? I want to bring in this much money. I want to be able to save this much. I want to be able to buy this house. I want to, whatever it is. Those things are okay. I'm not demonizing those. Those things are okay, right? Yeah, go out and go do those things. Great. But then think about your personal why, your spiritual why. What type of evolution are you looking for as an individual? Everything we want in our life is on the other side of fear. So how is this new project, new entrepreneurial venture going to challenge you in ways that it's scary to think about, that after you've done it, you are going to be a better version of yourself? Because if you go to the Tony Robbins events or whatever it is, I've never been to one, but I've heard of the walking on the coals. No one's ego wants to walk on the coals. Every single person's soul wants to walk across those coals because of the feeling they will have after they've done it, the pride they'll have in themselves. And I would just challenge you to love yourself enough to do the things that scare you a little bit. And then you'll love yourself enough to do the things that scare you a lot. And you will change who you are, not just your bank account, but if you do it intentionally and with evaluation and reflection, you'll change who you are as a person, which will then help contribute to other people's change.
I love this. This is really powerful, and I'm hoping that it's motivating for those that are struggling with that. Like, do I step out and do I do this thing? So I love the conversation today. If people want to reach out, find out more about you, or get in contact with you, how can people do that?
Sure. So my website is sellasyoure.com, SELLASYOUARE. Never had to spell that before. I was afraid I spelled it wrong. sellasyoure.com. Instagram is just the handle sellasyoure. And then you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm mostly active on LinkedIn because I sell to entrepreneurial sales professional sales teams. So that's really my main social media platform. And it's just Chris Caldwell. There are a lot of us out there, but I'm the one that owns Sell As You Are. So that's me on LinkedIn.
We'll make sure to put that in the show notes too, Chris. So if anyone wants to check him out, those are the places to go. So Chris, thank you for joining us, for giving some motivation to our audience. I know I'm fired up. It's like too late at night for me to be this jazzed up. So, but thank you for joining us. This is really, really helpful.
Of course, man. Of course, guys. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to contribute.
Thanks for listening to the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast. If you like what you heard on today's show, please leave us a review and subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. If you have a question, know someone that would make a good guest, or want to connect with Nate or David, head on over to yfprealestate.com and join the growing YFP Real Estate Investing Facebook group. As we conclude this week's episode of the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast, an important reminder that the content in this podcast is provided to you for your informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in the podcast and corresponding materials should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. We urge listeners to consult with a financial advisor with respect to any investment. Furthermore, the information contained in our archived newsletters, blog posts, and podcasts is not updated and may not be accurate at the time you listen to it on this podcast. Opinions and analyses expressed herein are solely those of your financial pharmacist, unless otherwise noted, and constitute judgments as of the dates published. Such information may contain forward-looking statements which are not intended to be guarantees of future events. Actual results could differ materially from those anticipated in the forward-looking statements. For more information, please visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thank you for your support of the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast. Have a great rest of your week.